Originally, the Roman legion was a city militia that gathered only to wage war and disbanded at the end of it. The legion included spearmen, javelin throwers, and a small number of cavalry, which included wealthy citizens from the upper class. However, such an army was only suitable for raids on neighbors, so in the middle of the 4th century BC, a reform was carried out. The legions stopped disbanding, and now the soldiers were paid a salary to maintain their equipment. The legion was now divided into maniples, separate combat units, which increased its maneuverability. If the phalanx, which was an indivisible, dense formation of spearmen, was vulnerable in a battle on rough terrain due to a breakdown in formation, then a maneuverable arrangement avoided this disadvantage and generally made it possible for more flexible tactics. For example, it became possible to withdraw part of the legion from the battle and replace it with another without losing organization. The fighters began to be divided primarily by experience and not by the type of weapons. The youngest warriors who had just joined the legion, armed with a short sword, a tower shield, and having light armor, were called hastati and made up the first line of battle order. Following them were the principals, the same swordsmen, but more experienced, having served for about 10 years. They made up the main force of the Roman army. The last to stand were the most experienced and oldest warriors, the triarii, armed with spears. It was really hard, then the triarii covered the regrouping of the legion in dense formation, or, maneuvering, repelled attacks from the rear and flanks. In this regard, in Rome there was a saying, "It came to the triarii," which meant a critical state of affairs. Lightly armed shooters, velites, were between battle formations and moved according to the situation in battle. The flanks of the legion were covered by cavalry from equites, the upper class who had power and privileges. Later, the cavalry detachments of the allied peoples also became part of the cavalry. Each legion was divided into 10 cohorts of 360 people. The cohorts, in turn, were divided into 3 maniples of 120 fighters. The maniples were divided into 2 centuries, and the centuries into 6 dozen. At the head of each centuria was a commander, a centurion, and the legion was led by 2 consuls. Such a structure and the possibilities of construction arising from it more than once proved their effectiveness in battles both with the Latins and Greeks, and with the Punians and Macedonians, who used the most effective system of the previous era, the phalanx. However, there was a problem of the heterogeneity of the troops, since some soldiers could not afford a complete set of equipment, which affected the combat capability of the detachment. In addition, the wars with Carthage show that the infantry needed support in the form of strong cavalry. Therefore, in 107 BC, Gaius Marius reformed the army. The maniples were abolished, and the remaining components of the legion, the cohorts, became less specialized. Each legionary now had several small darts, a short gladius sword, a dagger, a large shield, and heavy armor covering most of his body. It no longer mattered whether the person was Roman or Latin. The armament came at the expense of the state. The service life was 20 years, and after the service, the soldier received a land allotment. Soldiers were also paid higher salaries. The legions of the empire period were somewhat self-sufficient. Each legion was accompanied by specialists, engineers, lawyers, medical workers. Centuries were now numbered. The centurion was called primipal and was the assistant commander of the legion. His centurion was made up of selected warriors. The cavalry became more heavily armed and numerous, but it remained forever only an auxiliary part of the army. One of the reasons for the collapse of the Roman Empire was the weakening of the army. During the late Empire, the Romans began to rely more and more on mercenaries. There was no longer enough land for everyone, and the peoples of the steppe in several major battles showed that heavy cavalry was better than infantry in battle. But it was the Romans who proved that the organization and control of troops on the battlefield is much more important than their quantity, and sometimes quality. The Romans laid the foundations of the military system that are still used today.